Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Innovations in Agricultural Land and Protection webinar series. This webinar is brought to you by American Farmland Trust through a grant from Western SARE intended for land stewards and other land protection professionals who want to increase their understanding of existing tools, methods, and models in the area of farmland protection work. I'm your host, Deborah Naddix. I'm the California Senior Manager at American Farmland Trust, and I will be walking us through 3 specific topics related to farmland protection. Today we have Dr. Vicky Espinoza, and she will be providing an overview of the MLRP, the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program, and look at the specific example of the Tule Basin project in California. Then we'll go to Justin Brice, where he will showcase the project prioritization tool, PPT. It's a spatial analysis mapping platform that was used to identify agricultural easement pilot projects with groundwater recharge potential. And then at the end, we'll have Paul Lum, and he will be reviewing the most recent agricultural easement project that AFT was involved with. That's the Lost Wagon Wheel Ranch, and why and how that was selected. We will take questions and answers after each presentation, and then we'll have some time at the end for more. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be available for you on our website after today. Everyone is muted, and we invite you to put your questions in the chat. There's a section called questions in the toolbar, and we'll try to answer them as best we can at the end of each presentation. Before I introduce our first presenter, I'd like to note what brings us all here to this extremely urgent and important work of farmland protection. Between the years 2001 and 2016, 500,000 acres of agricultural land in California were converted to urban land uses, most of which were California's best, most fertile agricultural lands. So American Farmland Trust has a strategy. The San Joaquin Valley Land and Water Strategy is accelerating the conservation of the valley's precious land and water resources. This strategy implements a variety of integrated programs that protect the most valuable farm and ranch land. It scales up the adoption of regenerative agricultural practices, protects surface and groundwater supplies, provides technical training to a diverse group of farmers and ranchers, and helps support habitat for fish and wildlife. This is the strategy that we're centering when we provide these informational trainings, such as this webinar. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Vicky Espinoza. Dr. Vicky Espinoza is a researcher associate at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where she's conducting research to build community climate change resilience through California. Before joining JPL, she served as a project manager for the Nature Conservancy, where she led the development of a core plan for the Tule Subbasin Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program. For her PhD, she analyzed how agricultural land use transitions address groundwater overdraft and could affect vulnerable ag communities, and the information, access, and equity among underserved communities and farmers across California. She's the creator of the trilingual YouTube channel, Cali Water Ag, conducted in Spanish, Hmong, and English. Vicky's going to introduce us to the California Department of Conservation's newest program, the MLRP, Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program, and how it aims to facilitate strategic and equitable agricultural land repurposing to meet groundwater sustainability goals under SGMA, and share the specific example of how the strategic land repurposing is being implemented in the Tule Basin of Tulare County. Welcome, Vicky.
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning. So over the next 2 decades, major agricultural regions in California will transition to sustainable groundwater use. And this is because the state of California has experienced extended drought, and there has been an over-reliance and over-pumping of groundwater throughout the state of California, but predominantly in our agricultural regions. This extension or over-reliance on groundwater pumping has led to what are known as the 6 undesirable results, or the 6 sins of groundwater pumping. And SGMA aims to address these. So these are the lowering of water levels of rivers and streams, the lowering of groundwater levels, increasing contaminated water, sinking land or land subsidence, reduced groundwater storage, and increased seawater intrusion, mostly experienced among our coastal agricultural communities. Next slide. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was passed in 2014 to achieve groundwater sustainability by 2040. So what does sustainability mean under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or commonly referred to as SGMA? It means that it wants to reduce the undesirable results that I just mentioned and prevent them from from exacerbating them even more. As you can see in this map, everything that is in orange, which is predominantly in our Central Valley, is critically overdrafted, which means that so much water has been pumped out of our aquifers that the land is sinking, and it's leading to all the 6, or most of the 6 undesirable results throughout those regions. And that just depends on the area. Some have all 6, and some have a majority of those. Next slide. So increasing droughts and the need to address groundwater overdraft under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, will lead to a 10 to 20% reduction in irrigated farmland in the San Joaquin Valley by 2040. And several studies, including PPIC, have found this number by taking a look at how much water has been taken out of our groundwater aquifers and how much land needs, or how much groundwater reduction needs to happen in order to bring or rebalance our surface water and groundwater. So they took a look at current irrigated agriculture and calculated how much needs to be transitioned out of high groundwater use in order to reach a rebalance of aquifer and surface water. Next slide. So rather than having unmanaged and uncoordinated implementation of land fallowing across the state, which could be detrimental to our communities, it could lead to job loss, especially for our agricultural communities that rely on agriculture for livelihood. Leaving land fallowed could generate increase of dust and further health implications like asthma, as well as valley fever. So rather than having unmanaged and uncoordinated implementation, next slide, please. The state has considered multi-benefit land repurposing, which could provide strategic and locally representative alternatives to land fallowing. So what does this mean? What does multi-benefit land repurposing mean? Well, some of those options can be grazing, solar, dryland crops, parks and green spaces, especially around underserved communities that do not have access to these spaces. Groundwater recharge. Sometimes groundwater recharge can be complemented as wildlife-friendly recharge, especially along the San Joaquin Valley, where migratory birds can find these recharge areas to be beneficial during migration and breeding, and habitat restoration. So these are lands that use minimum water or less water than most agriculture, and provide other benefits to communities, to the environment, and to the economy. Next slide. So the California Department of Conservation developed a program called the Multibenefit Land Repurposing Program, commonly referred to as MLRP. And this program supports coordinated regional and basin scale efforts to achieve groundwater sustainability. Next slide. So it supports projects that increase regional capacity to repurpose agricultural land to reduce reliance on groundwater. So the key for this program is to transition to other alternative land uses that reduce groundwater use. And this, I just want to mention that this program is not mandatory, it's voluntary, but it's just an option for growers and regions, the agricultural regions, to consider when thinking about how can we reduce our groundwater in this moment so that we can help replenish that groundwater for the future. But the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program funds projects that achieve a multitude of things. So drought relief, community health, provide economic well-being, replenish water supply and water quality. It incorporates renewable energy and provides climate benefits for an area. Next slide. So this is what the structure of the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program looks like. The California's Department of Conservation manages this program. They've created this program, and regional block grants are who can apply: groundwater sustainability agencies, tribes, public agencies, local non-governmental organizations. And what this grant funds are multi-benefit agricultural land repurposing plans. So projects, it includes education and outreach related to land transition, as well as any permitting and monitoring costs. There's a separate fund for tribes to help implement multi-benefit agricultural land repurposing projects on the ground. And another part of this structure is the statewide support entity, which help the coordination among block grant recipients, and they facilitate communication and capacity building. Next slide. So the statewide support entity is comprised of Environmental Defense Fund, self-help enterprises with support from environmental incentives. Next slide. And their goal is to provide block grantee support, whether it's in helping or facilitating block grantees to communicate with farmers, how to conduct farmer engagement, community engagement, connecting them with tribal groups, peer learning facilitation, so they're able to provide resources to help facilitate community engagement, outreach, education, and they also guide monitoring and reporting for the grantees to help keep track of the progress under this program, as well as communications related to the multi-benefit land repurposing and any community engagement that is being conducted for the under the grantees. So successful applicants have demonstrated strong water and land use management foundation. So there's this meaning they're thinking about multi-benefit land repurposing. So what sort of land uses could help reduce groundwater, but provide an alternative benefit to the area, whether it be community health, economic, as well as environmental. And these are diverse partnerships. Also, I'll show you all of you in a later slide, but there's diverse partnerships, community members, farmers, environmental organizations, academics, and so on, local stakeholders. And there's a commitment to generating multiple benefits. So it's not just one project for recharge. It's recharge, wildlife friendly, addressing groundwater supply, groundwater quality. That's just an example, but it brings a lot of benefits to the region. Next slide. So what does the block grant look like in terms of finances and its distribution? So the block grant addresses planning of multi-benefit land repurposing projects, project permitting and design, and project implementation, as well as partner capacity, so that partners have the staff and the resources that they need to help facilitate with community members, farmers, et cetera, and among stakeholders, the success of these projects, as well as outreach and education and project monitoring. But at least 50% of these funds need to be spent on two components, which are project permitting and design and project implementation. So this program really emphasizes seeing these projects on the ground and being completed. Next slide. So while I was at the Nature Conservancy, I was able to work with a multitude of stakeholders. And I'll give you a little bit of insight on the Tule Subbasin Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program. So we worked with 3 groundwater sustainability agencies, 2 conservation trusts, community organizations, academia, environmental groups. So you have all these different perspectives working together. And this program, the Tule Subbasin decided to create 2 technical groups or 2 advisory groups, one for community members and another one for farmers, to really gain insights on what these community members need and to ensure that these multi-benefit land repurposing projects are addressing these regional and community member needs. Next slide. So the Tule Subbasin calculated that they needed to reduce overdraft by an estimated 115,000 acre-feet per year to achieve groundwater sustainability. So this helped guide the Tule Subbasin's priorities of building economic resiliency, protecting community waters. So there are a few underserved communities within the Tule Subbasin that are part of the projects that are being implemented to address their community issues. Ensuring ecosystem resiliency, so they're working with the Nature Conservancy and other environmental groups to ensure that these projects are also facilitating the continuity and connectivity of habitat in this region, and managing subsidence. So in the eastern Tule, there has been a significant amount of land subsidence or sinking of land that is being addressed as well. And improving flood management and the management of fallow lands so that it doesn't lead to economic loss or any other detrimental issues in the area. Next slide. So the project opportunities are to support local program partners, and this is why it's so important to have diverse partnerships and to work with a multitude of different perspectives, knowledge, expertise, including community members and farmers. They're performing outreach education, and they have had several workshops already, introducing multi-benefit land repurposing program, and also talking about what their goals as under this program are. They've conducted study recharge sites to provide recommendations for aquifer monitoring, and they have I think at least 1 or 2 pilot community-based nitrate sampling programs. So they evaluate expected local effects of land retirement, so there's a lot of communication with community members and farmers on this work, as well as performing groundwater recharge monitoring. Next slide. So that's all I have for today, but I do want to emphasize that this program is voluntary for growers. It's just a tool to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act so that community members and farmers have an option of, if I need to reduce groundwater, what are the other alternatives? And it could be less water-intensive agriculture, grazing, et cetera, as I had mentioned before. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Vicky. You're always such a great advocate for land repurposing and the MLRP program, especially when it comes to underserved communities in farming communities. So thank you for your overview, appreciate that. Yes, let's go to the phone lines and see if there's any questions out there. Give me a second while I look through the chat here. Okay, here's one. Is the land repurposing program mandatory to farmers? You said it was not mandatory, right? For that, and here's another one. Can farmers and community members become involved? If so, how?
That's a great question. Yes, community members and farmers can become involved. So one way to do that is to take a look at which area has been given a grant under the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program, and contact the GSA or one of the partners for how to become involved. Generally, and I do want to emphasize again, every region or every grantee is going to do their plan for land transition differently. So some of them might do workshops, others might do surveys, some might form advisory groups with community members. It just depends, but it's important to get in touch with the Groundwater Sustainability Agency that is involved in that Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program grant.
Great. I have one more. How is land suitable for repurposing identified?
That's a great question. So that is going to depend on the grant again. But for the Tule Subbasin, there were several spatial analysts, farmers, water managers coming together to develop a plan. So modeling, okay, what do we have on the ground right now in terms of agriculture, and how much water needs to be reduced? And mostly it's conversation with farmers. Who is planning on retiring their farmland voluntarily? Are there areas near wildlife refuges that are available? So it's mainly coordination and collaboration with community members and especially farmers.
Great. I have one more. I think we have time for one more quick question here before going on to the next topic. How are these projects saving agricultural land specifically?
That's a great question. It's strategic. So rather than random agricultural lands going out of production, it's taking a look at the most productive and communicating with farmers and saying, how can we work together in our area to help secure water for the future? And those are very difficult conversations to have, but it's better than having it be random and haphazard. So by coming together, having these diverse stakeholders talk to each other, you're forming a plan to keep agriculture that is going to stay in agriculture and it's productive, thriving, and then making sure that lands that are not as suitable for agriculture to be transitioned and still bring a benefit to the area, rather than leaving it fallow with no use, no economic benefit, and contributing to more environmental and health impacts for the region.
I feel like that's a really good, what you said about it being strategic, it's a good segue to our next presenter. So thank you very much, Vicky. I appreciate that. And we will have time at the end also for more questions for Vicky and the other presenters. So I do encourage everyone to go to the chat, or rather the questions category in the sidebar to ask for more questions. So, okay, let's continue. Thank you so much, Vicky. We're gonna go next to a discussion around the project prioritization tool. I would like to introduce Justin Brice. Justin Brice is a geospatial analyst with Conservation Biology Institute, CBI, and has experience applying spatial analysis to help conserve natural landscapes and working lands. Justin has a lived experience of agriculture growing up in California's Central Valley on a family walnut farm, and holds a degree in wildlife conservation and a minor in geospatial sciences from Humboldt University. Welcome, Justin. Thanks for joining us today.
I appreciate that. And thank you all for joining us today. So I grew up in the Central Valley, just north of Sacramento, and had grandparents that lived in Fresno. So I've been up and down the Central Valley and know it fairly well. Today, I've got the pleasure of sharing with you some work that I was a part of in 2019 to develop the project prioritization tool focused on the San Joaquin Valley and focused on groundwater recharge and those multi-benefit programs that Vicky was describing. So today I'll give a brief history on some of the work that led to this project, as well as provide an overview of the tool and provide some example scenarios and key data sets that you might be interested in using to help identify some of these areas that might be suitable for some of these programs. And then the demonstration will be a slideshow demo today. But there is a 40-minute webinar recorded demonstration that I will highlight as we move forward. Next slide, please. So a brief history. Back in 2015, American Farmland Trust and Conservation Biology Institute collaborated to develop the San Joaquin Valley Gateway. And this effort collected and prepared relevant data sets focused on the San Joaquin Valley to then populate this gateway, which I'll show you in a moment, to house these spatial data sets. Also in 2015, the gateway was used for a least conflict solar siting analysis done for the San Joaquin Valley floor. The focus of this was to shift development of solar facilities away from productive farmlands and away from environmentally sensitive areas and towards more degraded farmlands or areas that just aren't suitable for agriculture production and may not be suitable for restoration. So that was 2015. In 2018, the Land and Water Strategy was published. This work built upon the green print, utilizing data sets and that gateway to perform an environmental evaluation modeling system analysis. And what this is, we call it EAMS at CBI. It's a fuzzy logic modeling system, which is beyond the scope of this presentation, but I will touch on it a little bit later. And what this did is we modeled agricultural land quality as well as water stress in the valley, and then did an intersection to see where those high quality lands are that are under the most water stress. And then in 2019, I was invited on to help with the project prioritization tool as a means to build upon all this previous work and kind of curate this tool in a way that is quick and easy to access and is a good template to move forward with some initial high-level first look land use planning to identify areas that might be suitable for groundwater recharge, and then you could zoom in there and do due diligence and learn more. Next slide, please. All right, so I mentioned the gateway. The gateway, the San Joaquin Valley Gateway, is a branded portal into Databasin. So let me back up. Databasin was developed by Conservation Biology Institute as a collaborative platform that is available worldwide, and you access it through a web browser. It's free. If you sign up for an account, you can download data sets that have downloads enabled for the public. There are privacy settings as well. And you can also form groups of users as well as galleries and maps to kind of curate the data. Next slide, please. So when you sign up for Databasin, this gives you access to a workspace where you can go in and view maps such as the San Joaquin Valley Project Prioritization tool and save that to your workspace. You can also bookmark items to go back to later, as well as message other users through the platform. Next slide, please. So this is what the San Joaquin Valley Gateway looks like. We have quite a few gateways on Databasin. And so what these are is a more focused look at a specific topic or a specific geography. In this case, the San Joaquin Valley. Next slide, please. And so going back to that green print, the green print lives in the San Joaquin Valley Gateway on Databasin. And I want to emphasize that just because something is in the gateway or you're accessing the gateway doesn't mean you're limited to that. The Power of Data Basin allows you to add any data set that's available on a data basin to your map. You can also upload your own data sets as well. So that is a huge opportunity. And there are privacy settings, like I mentioned, if there's sensitive data. So the green print here just went through, identified a bunch of useful data sets for land use planning and curated those into different galleries based on soils, transportation, energy, environmental benefits, and farmland. Next slide, please. Similarly, the least conflict solar siting analysis utilized the gateway, but this was more involved. This was a stakeholder-led project, bringing together the solar industry, the agriculture community, as well as the conservation community, and brought them together utilizing the gateway to look at the data sets and focus on areas, identify areas of critical environmental importance, as well as critical agriculture importance, and then overlay all those together to identify areas of least conflict. Doesn't mean it's no conflict, but this helps kind of avoid time-consuming and money-consuming litigation for farmers or conservationists, going to court to try to protect areas. So this kind of streamlines the process a little bit. It identified 470,000 acres of least conflict land, making up roughly 5% of the 9.5 million acres in the area. Next slide, please. And then the land and water strategy also stored as galleries and maps in the gateway. This looked at finding the best farmland, especially with reliable water, located mainly around cities. Those were the ones most at risk of development. And I'll go into more of this a little bit. Next slide, please. And then that leads us to the topic at hand today, the project prioritization tool. And so on the right there, that image is a gallery. It's got some descriptive text. I know you can't read that, but those first few paragraphs are hyperlinks to the Quick Start map and the Quick Start guide, as well as that webinar I mentioned earlier that provides a 40-minute demonstration of how you can use the tool. And below that, within these galleries, you can create folders. And so for this one, we created a folder for data, documents, and maps. And you can explore those, and all of those previous projects I mentioned are included under that data folder. Next slide, please. And again, yeah, next slide, please. So I want to run through a few of the key data sets that we used in the land water in the project prioritization tool. This is not exhaustive. In the initial startup map, we have 18 data sets altogether. Some of those important ones are the Farmland Mapping and Monitoring Program, the Soil Agricultural Groundwater Banking Index, the San Joaquin Valley Top Crops is what we're calling it. So for the PPT, a lot of these data sets, once they're loaded to data basin, you could click them on and off and restyle them. But oftentimes the different attributes themselves, you can't turn those off individually. And so there was some more processing done that enables, instead of having a data set of all the crops and you have a giant legend with all these different colors, this version allows you to turn on and off crops individually. And then we've also included the agricultural land quality data set, which was from the land and water strategy effort, as well as the least conflict composite area, conservation easement database, including protected areas. And then we produced two different national hydrography subset data sets. One is kind of infrastructure, canals, and ditches. The other is streams and rivers. We've included water district boundaries as a web service coming directly from the California Department of Water Resources, as well as mapped areas that do not currently have water districts. And then there's also a high development threat layer that we included. That was originally done back in the land and water strategy as well. Next slide, please. And so just to highlight some of these data sets and why we're using them. The Farmland Mapping and Monitoring Program is a program conducted by the California Department of Conservation. They've been monitoring land use since 1984. It is updated every 2 years, and agricultural land is rated according to soil quality and irrigation status, with the best quality being called prime farmland. And when you go to the quick start, prime farmland is what we have on by default. Next slide, please. Next is the Soil Agricultural Groundwater Banking Index. This is a suitability index for groundwater recharge potential on agricultural lands. And this includes deep percolation, root zone residence time, topography, chemical limitations, as well as soil surface condition. Next slide, please. Cropscape, I had mentioned earlier. This is a national data coverage provided by USDA, updated every year with updated crops. Next slide, please. And this is the agricultural land quality data set that was produced with the land and water strategy. I've included links on these slides. We'll follow up with links as well so you can access all of these directly. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go into this just a little bit. This is what the model structure looks like for that land quality data that we were just looking at. And the things with EAMS, the Environmental Evaluation Modeling System, it's a fuzzy logic modeling structure, but it also allows you complete transparency into what data sets fed into the model, how they were manipulated through the model to arrive at the final output. And there is functionality in Databasin where you can explore this data set, which includes all of these other inputs. It includes the inputs as well as the intermediary layers as well. And so you can click on a location and see exactly why it might be scoring high or low for land quality. Next slide, please. And similarly, water stress was also modeled. As you can see, the southern San Joaquin is the most water stressed region, with the northern area the least. Next slide, please. And again, this was another model done in EAMS. And so you can see some of the inputs there. I know it's hard to read, but essentially it's a change in groundwater depth, other water specific imported water supply, local supply score. I wasn't involved in these particular analyses, but this is available as a report, and you can see exactly what fed into those models. Next slide, please. And then this is the output of the land water strategy, looking at land quality and water stress. So the darker the color, the higher the quality, and red is high water stress and green is low water stress. And so you can see we do have quite a bit of quality farmland that is highly water stressed in the southern San Joaquin Valley. Next slide, please. All right, so next we're going to go through a few scenarios to get our brains thinking about how we might be able to utilize all this data and how it relates back to Vicky's presentation about the different programs and opportunities for folks to transition farmland or help manage groundwater recharge. Next slide, please. So for this scenario, I was trying to put myself in the shoes of a water district manager or someone working with a groundwater sustainability agency, and perhaps you do. So some of the key data sets you might be interested in would be that groundwater banking index, the SAGB, as well as those the canals and ditches, looking for that surface water availability to see if the infrastructure exists to transport the stormwater to a potential new groundwater recharge basin site. Yeah, and then the next would be streams and rivers potentially, as well as development threat. So, and this is not exhaustive list at all. There's many data sets you can utilize to do this. Next slide, please. And so here's an image in place of the demo today. I've got some slide images here. When you go to that gallery and click the Quick Start map, this is what you will see, minus that little window in the middle. But what I'm doing here is highlighting that if you've signed up for Databasin and you have your own account, when you access the PPT, you can click that Save button up in the upper left corner and save a version of this to your workspace. So this allows you to go in, you can make changes to dataset symbology, transparency, you can remove datasets, you can add in your own datasets and save that map. And you've got your own working map that's styled how you want and is custom to your needs. And I'll also add there too, you see the map details tab first, and there's a little narrative there that describes what this is and also hyperlinks to resources. Next slide. And so this is what you would see. This is just the prime farmland from the FMMP data set. Like I mentioned, we process these a little further in that each of the different attributes can be turned on and off. And so you could turn on the other data sets as well. So on the left-hand side, I know it's hard to see, but you've got your layers there. And up at the top, you have an Add Datasets feature. Now I want to spend a little time on this. So you click Add Datasets, and since you're in the San Joaquin Valley Gateway, it's going to restrict your search to the gateway. And so if you're looking for transmission lines or some other data set, go ahead and give that a search. If you don't find what you're looking for in the gateway, you can adjust that setting. There's a settings adjustment that you could search all of Databasin to see if there's any data out there that might be useful in that regard. And yeah, and I'll also mention that swiper tool. You see that bar down on the kind of the right side. And then it's also in the left in the layers tabs. All the data sets above that bar will be on the left-hand side, and everything below will be on the right-hand side. So working with a lot of these data, you might want to put a few layers on top, have a few below, and swipe back and forth and see kind of what that looks like. Next slide, please. So here, yes, so we're still doing that scenario. We're looking for a groundwater recharge basin because we've got all this excess stormwater. So for this example, I clicked on both excellent and good recharge potential. And as you can see down in the southern part of the image, there's a lot of good areas there. Next slide, please. And so what I did here is also turn on those canals to see areas with good groundwater recharge potential that have surface water infrastructure. Next slide, please. And then in addition, I threw on the development threat level. So maybe there's suitable land that would be great for groundwater recharge. It's close to a canal that could easily be diverted to flood when needed, and it might be in a development path. Someone might consider that in a way to kind of protect the groundwater recharge potential instead of paving it over with an apartment complex or something like that. And as you can see here too, the development threat and the SAGB data are on top of the swiper tool. And so you could see the canals across on both sides of that bar. But if this was live, I could go to the left and it would pull away all that red and green and just show the canals underneath. Next slide, please. So for scenario 2, I was putting myself in the shoes of a land trust looking to protect agricultural lands. And with the added benefit, all the multi-benefits, pollinator protection, groundwater recharge, protecting productive farmlands. So for this example, thinking about the flood managed groundwater recharge called FloodMar, that uses suitable crops that can be flooded with extra stormwater to help recharge the aquifer and get that water out across the landscape so it can percolate down. Some of those key data sets would be the ag land quality, as well as SAGB, Cropscape, so you could see what crops are being grown where, as well as those easements and protected areas. You know, maybe there's farmland next to a protected area, then maybe that would be a good one, as well as the development threat to see where those suitable areas are under threat. Next slide, please. So again, we're going to step through a few images here. Here I've got the agricultural land quality turned on. So you can see dark green is the highest quality, with red being the worst. Next slide, please. And here I've turned on the groundwater banking index as well. Next slide, please. And then here I turned on Cropscape to see where those excellent and good groundwater recharge areas are in relation to crops. And I know it's hard to see, but down central image, down low, you've got a lot of purple and green. Those are vineyards and almonds. And then I've got the SAGB data on top of that with a filter applied. And so you can see it's kind of washed out, but that area just above that is suitable for groundwater recharge, and it has those crops that would be suitable for flood-mar. Next slide, please. And for this instance, I turned on the easements and protected areas, and by default, those are kind of pastel colors. And so those little triangle boxes in the left-hand side where the layers are, you could click those, and you have the option to see more details about the data set and kind of visit that data set's homepage, where you can see more details about what the data set represents, who uploaded it, what the content year is, and other metadata like that. So clicking that triangle button gives you a menu option there, and you can adjust the style as well as filter some of these data sets. There are limitations with some styling with web services as well as rasters, but if they're vectors, as in polygons, you can style those and filter those. And so what I did here is color the protected areas red and the easements orange, and just to get some contrast there, just for this example. Next slide, please. I forgot I included this. So this is a closer look at what I was just describing about editing that style and seeing the details. You can also zoom to a data set to the full extent of that data set, as well as remove it. If you aren't using it and you want to bring in another data set, you can remove that one and add in others. Next slide, please. And I threw on the development threat level here as well for those land trusts looking for productive farmland to conserve that might be good for groundwater recharge through the flood-mar scenario. Next slide, please. And then for this scenario, we're looking for land that might be suitable for a multi-benefit transition to other uses, given that Sigma is planning on retiring a lot of irrigated croplands, as Vicky had mentioned. I figured this would be a good scenario. So this, we would look at irrigated crops that might not be supported right now by a water district and might solely be reliant on groundwater. Those areas would be where kind of taking the first look at what those could possibly transition into, whether it's less water intensive crops, whether it's grazing or habitat restoration. And so some of those data sets would be areas without a water district, as well as the solar lease conflict composite area. You know, maybe the land is suitable for solar. Terrestrial connectivity. This is a statewide data set linking different cores and highlighting the linkages across the state, as well as potential habitat. And I do want to make a point about this. We did reach out to Scott Butterfield with the Nature Conservancy. He was the lead author on a report looking at kind of the land retirement opportunities and looking for areas that would be suitable for habitat restoration, that are close to protected areas and where endangered species are known to occur. Next slide, please. So this is that data set, areas without water districts. And so this has a transparency applied to it, Next slide, please. And here I turned on those solar least conflict areas. Yellow is potential areas of least conflict. In this image, there's not too many of the primary least conflict, but you do see that some of these areas do overlap with areas without water districts. So if these farm fields are going to be fallowed, perhaps solar is an economic option for the landowner to transition to that. And with that, I know there's a lot of talk with agrivoltaics and pollinator habitat restoration under solar panels, as well as grazing. So this is a lot of opportunity potentially. Next slide, please. This is that terrestrial connectivity data set. Those areas in purple are the highest core areas to protect. And so you see some of the least conflict lands just outside of those areas. Next slide, please. And then this includes that Nature Conservancy layer I mentioned. Down at the bottom of the image, you could see kind of these gray and green circles kind of buffered from the protected areas that overlap those areas without conservation districts. So those may be, if those are being farmed currently and they're running out of, water, it might be a good time to transition it to habitat. Next slide, please. And for scenario 4, I don't have any images to go with it, but I was putting myself in the shoes of county staff, potentially looking over a new solar or other development proposal. And so some of those key data sets would be ag land quality, to see how important is this land to agriculture that this developer wants to build upon. Maybe take a look at the least conflict composite data and see if there are opportunities there, as well as the prime farmland, development threat, and cropscape to see what crops are being grown, whether they're productive or kind of transitioning out. So that's what I had for you today. I appreciate your time and attention. We're including resource links that will be emailed out after the presentation. That first one there is the 40-minute demo. We've got the manual as well as the quick start, and links to the land and water strategy report and those key messages too from that. So with that, I think we could take some questions maybe.
Yes, we can. Thank you so much, Justin.
Oh, and Deborah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can we go back one slide?
Sure, absolutely. Go right ahead.
This is what I'm most excited for. Is we're going to be updating this. So we've got some new data sets. The Cropscape data set should be coming in soon, updated, as well as FMP, the protected areas and conservation easements. And so we're also going to attempt to do some outreach to gather input and feedback from our users to make sure that this is meeting their needs and that they understand what they can do with it, and try to get this out there more. Appreciate that. Thanks, Deb.
That's great. No, I'm glad you stopped me and were able to include that. That's an important point. Yeah, it's really cool to see all those layers overlap, so you can really hone in on the most pertinent priority areas. Thanks for providing those scenarios too. I think it really allows to touch and connect to anybody in the audience who might be in need of a tool like this. And want to say that while these examples, these projects are centered in the San Joaquin Valley and California area, I think they're really applicable to wherever the participants might be coming from. So wanted to note that as well.
That's a great point.
Thank you so much, Justin. Yeah, let's go to some questions. Let's see what we have here. How about this one? Do you know of other tools similar in other states or plans to expand this one?
That's a good question. I am not aware of similar tools in other areas. I will say that Databasin could potentially be utilized for that, but that California does have quite an abundance of spatial data sets. So that may be a factor, limiting factor. But yeah, if folks are not from California and they're interested in doing this, this is something that we could totally do. And with what data are available, what data folks may have, whether it's public or not, we could keep it private and they can work with it in Databasin, definitely. And we would love to expand this out. So if anyone is interested, let us know.
Sorry about that.
I will say there are some other tools that I'm aware of that are kind of Sigma data viewers, but you don't have the ability to bring in any data set you want. You're kind of limited to what they provide. So I think this tool offers more functionality and collaboration. And I will add as well, I didn't touch on it here, but there are drawing features as well as commenting features. So if you've signed up for a Databasin account, you can save a version of this map and start creating drawings of where you want to investigate further, highlight areas. And if you keep it private and you have other folks you're working with, you can invite them to the map to provide comments and feedback privately.
Excellent, thank you. Can I throw one more question out at you, Justin? I think we're doing good on time. How could local planners use this and make local land use decisions?
So I want to stress that this is a decision support tool. And so this would be kind of a jumping off point of taking a first look. I think a lot of that goes in terms of moving forward after your first look. I think that is a lot of, I don't know about, I would say contact the county, maybe, if there's other folks in the community to help inform the decision as well. You know, these data and models are only as good as the data put into them. And, you know, the saying is that models are just models aren't the reality. So definitely you could take a first look at some of these data and then kind of go to your local land use planning commission maybe to kind of share your ideas and thoughts on this, and yeah, kind of get some feedback on what's happening on the ground currently. So that would be my best advice for that.
That sounds good. Thank you. I think I'm going to move us along because we still have one more presentation, and then we do want to take more questions at the end. We've noticed some questions coming in late for Vicky, so we'll save those towards the end, and any others that you all might have also for Justin, we'll be taking those at the end as well. So let's talk about this specific example here of Lost Wagon Wheel Ranch. I'd like to introduce our own Paul Lum. He's our Senior Agricultural Specialist with AFT in California. Paul is also a second-generation farmer in Northern California. And years ago, his family protected 60 acres through a conservation easement held by a local land trust. So now Paul is going to share one of the most recent examples that AFT has, this Lost Wagon Wheel project. Hi, Paul.
Here we are. Thank you, Deb. Hello, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to present. In 2022, the American Farmland Trust purchased an agricultural conservation easement from Cole Upton and his family, who own the Lost Wagon Wheel Ranch. The conservation easement ranks as the gold standard for conservation easements and is the first of 10 AFT demonstration projects that address future impacts to the region's farmland and dwindling water supplies. The farm is exactly the type of productive, versatile, and resilient agricultural land that California wants to save. Funding was provided by an agricultural land mitigation agreement between the California Department of Conservation and the California High-Speed Rail Authority. The ranch ownership spans 3 generations, and pictured are the family members that own the land. Next slide. The Lost Wagon Wheel Ranch was established in the 1940s in Merced County, located in the heart of California's San Joaquin Valley. The easement protects 1,100 acres, which lie in a rapidly growing region. As a result of depleted groundwater supplies, water use is allocated and conservation farming practices are necessary. Next slide. The Uptons manage their farm with a sustainable approach, focusing on long-term climate resiliency and farm sustainability. They implement regenerative farming methods such as crop diversity, crop rotation, and compost applications to improve soil health. Wildlife conservation is enhanced with 16 acres maintained for habitat, including wetlands and ponds. The Uptons are careful users of water resources, evident through the planting of grain crops that do not require water. Also maintaining recharge basins and capturing of stormwater. Cole Upton says, I like not having all permanent crops that require water annually. Next slide. The Uptons exemplify true stewardship of land and water resources and have cemented a legacy of farmland protection. Cole Upton says, you get tied to the land as farmers. My brothers are here, my sons are here. It's a family thing. To me, society is stronger when you have an embedded farmer as part of the community. Next slide. Thank you. I can take some questions now.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Paul. It's really nice to end on that note and see a real life project that has resulted. And just to say that this is one of the, I would say, gold standards for the projects that we're looking to continue in the San Joaquin as part of the San Joaquin Land and Water Strategy. So this is where we need a strategic community effort, and this is what these webinars are about, is to provide these conversations and continue some potential good projects around this. So thanks again, Paul. Yes, let's go to some questions. Let's see what we have here. How about, okay, we have an MLRP question for Vicky. I think maybe what we'll do is ask Vicky and Justin to come back, because there's some various questions for both of you, I think. The first question is, has there been any mention of a pay schedule of practices for farmers? I believe this is a MLRP question, right? Yeah. Oh, Vicky, you're on mute.
Sorry, yes. So the question that I heard, is there a paid schedule for farmers to participate in MLRP?
Any mention of a pay schedule of practices for farmers?
Okay. I have not heard of a paid schedule of practices. I do want to mention that the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program, or MLRP, is still fairly new. It's a lot of learning, and each grantee is addressing this in different ways. So there could be that a grant may pay farmers to transition their land if they are interested. There are also several programs that the GSAs are participating in to help promote the transition or the implementation of other benefits within agricultural practices. But nothing specific that falls as a requirement for MLRP.
Okay, good, thank you. Next question is for Justin. How the PPT and databasin is funded? How is the PPT and databases funded?
That is a great question. Currently, we have an RCPP grant for this year's updates that we're going to be doing, but currently there is no long-term sustained funding. So I would be interested in locating some funding to keep it up to date and yeah, make some updates and provide more resources. So currently it is not.
That's right. Okay, how about another one for MLRP? What has been the feedback from landowners? Interested or hesitant?
That's a fantastic question. When I was a part of the workshops, so I was still at the Nature Conservancy, it was a mix. I would say it was a mix. There were some growers that were interested in the prospects of transitioning part of their land, and that is an option. It doesn't mean that all of the land that a grower has needs to go into transition. It's just a matter of saying, I have this alfalfa field and I can flood it because in this region it works. It provides migratory bird habitat. And there have been collaborations with Nature Conservancy to work with farmers to do that. So it's just making sure that we're bringing in different alternatives to agriculture. I think now is a fantastic time to talk about, you know, having farmers, as Paul mentioned from that beautiful quote that he shared, now is the time for farmers to be a part of this time to bring in agriculture and make it work with the environment and community and just economic well-being for a region. But there has been a mix. There were concerns in terms of labor. There were concerns in terms of, you know, we have to keep in mind that this is people's livelihood. But I think that I really want to emphasize that now's the time to be a part of the conversation and collaborate with MLRP grantees.
Yes, thank you. And another one here from MLRP is, what's the status of the grant program? And can you think of any others?
So as of now, there are 2 rounds of funding. There have been 2 rounds of funding. I have not heard of any further funding coming in. I just may be out of the loop. But if you have any more questions, the Department of Conservation's MLRP website would be able to give you that information further. And in terms of other, I think I may have heard something related to other programs. There are other programs, for example, I believe it's the Department of Water Resources that created a program called LandFlex that also helps with funding for transition or implementation of alternative land use benefits in agricultural regions.
Okay, let's see. We have a few going on, trying to see who's left here in the questions. All right. The scenarios, the easement and the MLRP, seem to compensate the farmers to stay in farmers, which is good. How can we continue to provide that funding to farmers to support our food supply? And anyone can answer this if you're so inclined.
So in terms of further funding for farmers, and I want to make sure I understood the question correctly. So more funding for growers to help or facilitate transition. I would say that the best way to be in touch with any potential funding would be through the groundwater sustainability agencies. At the moment, they are the ones that are developing the groundwater sustainability plans and the ways in which to implement strategies to address groundwater. And I do want to remind everyone that MLRP is a tool to help address the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. It's not a law, it's not mandatory, but I would say the best resource is your groundwater sustainability agency.
I'll also jump in.
And yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to add that, and farmers probably know this already, but the USDA NRCS field offices would be a good resource as well to connect with them and see what other programs they may have that might help support, different management practices. Yep,
good point. This is also true. I mean, the NRCS is key here, not only in easement work, but the RCPP funds that you mentioned, Justin, is what has funded this San Joaquin Land and Water Conservation Collaborative work with CBI. So that's, I think, to be noted with this collaboration with AFT and CBI. So thank you for bringing that up. Let's see. Here's one more. Are the transitions covered by MLRP temporary or perpetual?
I'm not sure what they mean by covered. In terms of funding, some of the grantees will fund growers to participate in the program when it comes to implementing land into a project. As of now, it just depends. It depends on the grantee, whether if it's habitat restoration, it may be most likely permanent, but I believe in the MLRP requirements, a project is to last 10 years.
Yep, that's how I understood the question, is more the transition projects. Are they temporary or perpetual? So yeah, you answered that.
Okay, yep.
Well, I think we've covered most of our questions, unless someone puts anything else at the last minute here. You have any other points you wanted to make? Now's the time. I think I don't see any other questions, so I think we can go ahead and conclude. Yep, this is the conclusion of our webinar on innovation in farmland protection, and we're thrilled to see so much interest today. We'd like to invite you back for the next 6 webinars that we'll be hosting this year on farmland protection. I want to thank our presenters today, Justin Brice, Dr. Vicky Espinoza, and Paul Lum, for their help and their support in this work. And a special shout out to my colleagues at AFT that are behind the scenes here at the webinar, Kara Heckert and Teresa O'Connor, for their support in content creation and in communications as well. I'm Deborah Nuttes at American Farmland Trust, and thank you again for your participation. It's been a pleasure spending time with you all. Have an excellent day.